Welcome to colleagues who've just entered the room. We'll just give a few more moments for anybody else to join and then we'll begin. Thank you for joining us. Well, I think we're a minute past, so I think we'll start this. And yes, Mark, we will be sharing a recording both on YouTube, but also a link to those who are attending. Thank you for joining this Literacy and Social Justice Centre seminar on the right to read, led by Professor Etna Kennedy on motivating and engaging our literacy learners. Before I welcome Etna, I'd just like to share with you some of the good news from the OU, just 2 slides to welcome our PhD students, our new colleagues, and also do move me on, Etna, thank you. Our new colleague who's working with us this year, Dr. Sam Hulston, who has a prestigious ESRC fellowship within the Centre of Literacy and Social Justice this year with Helen and I to build on her doctoral work. That revealed that young children's embodied engagement in curated story world play is important, and it showed how this can offer these young people inclusive and engaging routes to reading enjoyment. So congratulations to Sam. If you're interested in this area, do look out for the opportunities to get involved and join the Open University's Reading for Pleasure newsletter, where you'll hear more. If we move on, thank you. We can see the 4 new colleagues who are, well, 3 new colleagues who are working with us. Anna Gawthorpe, who currently works at the University of East London, is in her 3rd year of her D now, and that's focused on utilising the lenses of critical race theory, critical literacy, and culturally relevant pedagogy to scrutinise reading for pleasure practices with PGC students. Her intention here is to develop anti-racist reading for pleasure practices, particularly through reading aloud and book talk. It's fascinating, the data that Anna's drawn on working with her students. And turning to new colleagues, Kate Sayer from World Book Day is now working with us on her OU-funded PhD, exploring the role of parental engagement in reading for pleasure, potentially understanding more about parents' identities as readers and the development and impact of these on their children's reading for pleasure. Vicky Varley, who's currently an English lead at Lydgate Infants in Sheffield, is focused for her EdD on targeted school-based approaches that aim to nurture positive reader identities and increase motivation and frequency of reading in children who can read but don't choose to yet, or read for pleasure, that is. Angie Baker is the head of learning and programme design at the Brilliant Club, which is a widening participation charity to support most disadvantaged young people in our communities to access higher ed institutions. Angie's EdD is focused on how reading interventions affect both the skill and the will of struggling readers as they make the transition from primary to secondary schools. Big welcome to all these colleagues who either experienced working with us or new working with us. We look forward to your insights as we move on. And let's turn now to the main session itself and the reason you've joined us today. Over 200 colleagues signed up, and we hope that many who aren't able to actually join us here will follow this through on YouTube and listen to Etna's lecture. Etna is an Associate Professor of Literacy Studies in the School of Language, Literacy and Early Childhood Education. She's the Director of the newly formed DCU Centre for Literacy and Research in Policy and Practice. And previously, she was a classroom teacher in Dublin and the States. I first met Etna about 15 years ago when I had the privilege of being one of her external examiners for a rather fabulous PhD, which she completed under the supervision of Jackie Marsh. And she won the International Literacy Association's Outstanding Doctoral Dissertation Award for that work. And Etna's been pioneering forward since that day. She's going to talk to us today about the Right to Read Research Initiative, which is a longitudinal university and school literacy project, which she directs to create powerful literacy environments that motivate and engage our young people as readers, as writers, and as thinkers. Etna has been the president of the Literacy Association Ireland, and she's undertaken extensive work with the Department of Education there to inform the development of their National Literacy, Numeracy and Digital Literacy Strategy, which is a 2024 to 2033 strategy, a forward-looking strategy. Apart from a wealth of papers on literacy research, policy and practice, Etna has published 2 books, Raising Literacy Achievement in High Poverty Schools, an Evidence-Based Approach, and most recently, just in January of this year, Teaching and Assessing Writing in the Primary School, a whole school approach. I'm really genuinely privileged and delighted to be welcoming Etna to the Literacy and Social Justice seminar series, and I know she's got a lot to share with us, so I'm going to zip my lips and pass over to you. Welcome, Etna.
Thank you so much, Teresa, for that warm welcome, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here online with you today, and thank you to Teresa and colleagues for the invitation to share the work that I've been doing here in Ireland. As Teresa said, it's a longitudinal literacy project, and I've been working with schools in Ireland that are designated as disadvantaged, and they're known as DEIS schools in Ireland because DEIS is an Irish word meaning opportunity. So it's about creating an equal opportunity for those schools and teachers. So what I'm going to try and do today is give you a little bit of a background to the project and the origins and the vision of the project, what our current research foci are, and then a flavour of how we actually work with schools and how we bring the theory and the research underpinning literacy to practice in classrooms. And I'll share examples of how we work on writing, drawing on the book that Teresa mentioned at the start, which really shows and showcases the work we've been doing with schools over the last number of years, and then a little bit on reading engagement towards the end, and then a quick sum up. So as Teresa said, my heart is in the classroom. I started out as a classroom teacher, and I think that's probably what drives the kind of work that I do with teachers in schools now. It keeps me connected to what's happening in schools. As Teresa said, my work, I see it really as looking and interrogating the research base, seeing how that might work in an Irish classroom, and then learning from that and back to research again. So it's a kind of a cyclical piece, from research to practice to theory and back again. And the work that I've been doing in the policy level has been very interesting too. And I look forward to continuing that work as we go on. So I suppose the big vision for us, yes, of course, it's important to raise achievement and build children's motivation and engagement, but we see literacy really as a human right, and it's that tool of personal empowerment. And this idea that the children it's important that they can not only read and write, but they choose to do it outside of school. And Fisher and Frey talk about, having the skill and the will, and then finding the thrill in reading. And ultimately, we know that that children who read more and are more engaged in society and cultural and civic life. And we're after, I suppose, a more just and democratic and equitable society. And if you look up in the top corner there, really what we're trying to do is help kids discover that potential and what they want to be in life, and give them the skill set that will help them realize that potential. So as Teresa said, it's a transformative emancipatory lens that we're looking at in terms of the project. And that really is that attempt to better understand the real world phenomena of the literacy achievement gap for children in disadvantaged contexts. And it's about trying out things together and working closely with teachers. My original doctoral work that Teresa alluded to was with children in first and second class in one junior school. And when we started to think about expanding that work, we thought, well, yes, individual teachers can and do make a difference to children's development, but it can be maximised and made more powerful if a whole school works together. And in Ireland, the schools in schools, children start into reception at age 4. Just right after their 4th birthday, they can start. And the idea is that we would attend to have that dual focus, build up the cognitive skills, but also attend to the affective dimensions of literacy. And our curriculum integrates oral language reading and writing. So how can we do that in a way that engages children and builds their self-efficacy? So the little diagram on the side there, you'll see the child is at the centre of it. We also know from multiple research lenses and writers like Darling Hammond that sustained customized professional development for teachers is critical, and to build their content and pedagogical content knowledge, but also thinking about their own self-efficacy and their own stimulation and continuing to build their skills, and that how they can work with us to challenge and grow the knowledge base, and how they can use that, because that research is done in particular classrooms in particular contexts and might not always work in an Irish context. So how can we work together and teachers become these kind of adaptive experts who can use that knowledge base in their own classrooms to transform practice and outcomes for children. So we've had lots, I suppose, of phases of research and development over the years with different schools. It's continuously evolving, and we see classrooms really as the sites of systematic, intentional inquiry, drawing on the work of Cochrane, Smith and Little. So at the moment, we're scaling in. This notion of scale, it doesn't always mean getting bigger, it means scaling in. And what we're trying to do is to identify what are the critical enabling and constraining factors within particular classrooms and schools. So we're working with a cluster of 8 schools at the moment, 5 that were originally working with us, who've had an awful lot of turnover in recent years, new leadership. We've got problems in terms of retaining teachers in the city, in the urban context, cost of living. There's lots of reasons why, and shortage of teachers. And so how can we shore up and build the kind of infrastructure within those schools and build leadership teams in the schools that they can sustain things going forward? And then we're scaling out to work with some new schools, and we're working with our first opportunity is to work with the Gael School, where there's the dual language focus. They're learning in Irish and in English at the same time. And this idea of, well, if these clusters can work well together, other clusters can come and learn from them. And so I suppose it's this idea that teachers and researchers are working together. And I like that quote from Marilyn Cochrane Smith, because she says, it's about working within inquiry communities to generate local knowledge, envision and theorize practice, and to interpret and interrogate the theory and research of others. So there's a whole range of data that we draw on, and I'll intersperse the rest of the presentation around, I'll show examples, say, for example, from the interviews or audio or artifacts from classrooms. So how do we work? Like when I did my doctoral work, it was me working with one school, and now we've worked with more than 20 schools across Dublin and outside of Dublin. So now have a team of teachers, and most of them actually started out in the original phase of this as classroom teachers, and then got bitten by the bug and came back and did master's level work with us, and are now out helping me support teachers and schools, the teachers and schools that we're working with. And I think that they're also practicing classroom teachers, or they're principals, and the value and they're all teaching in disadvantaged contexts. And schools that we begin working with and have worked with over the years always cite, they understand our context, they understand the realities and the complexities, and yet, so they'll understand where our problems are, and because they're using and implementing these methodologies themselves, they can give very practical advice as well as the research guidance. So on-site and sustained, when COVID came along, we moved online, but most of our work in this year ahead will be on-site in the schools that we're working with. And then the schools always determine where will we start. Like, will we start with oral language, reading, writing? Where will we begin? And oftentimes they'll pick writing, because writing seems to get the least amount of attention in classrooms. Reading seems to get the bigger portion of it. And systematically working with the teachers to build their content and pedagogical content knowledge. And then as trust and relationships develop, the coach that's assigned to the school will work with the teachers, maybe go in and demonstrate a few lessons, or if a teacher's working on something, the teacher might say, come on in, can you have a look at this and see how I could help sharpen it? When we start working with school, they'll always begin with, well, what's working well, what's not working so well, and then we work out a plan of how we might move forward, and then the teachers will trial and experiment with new approaches with support from the coach, and we build these kind of teacher researcher mini inquiry projects with them. So what we're trying to do is build a framework that will work for each school, and out of the 8 schools we have, they're all entirely different from one another, even though they're only within a few miles of one another. So it has to be a framework and a way of thinking about how to improve literacy outcomes for children. And obviously linked to student data, like where are the children actually struggling, and having enough formative assessments so that teachers can plot a way forward and then integrate the new approaches and methodologies with it. And then as teachers develop these little mini inquiries and work with us to trial things, we'll have some cluster-wide opportunities for teachers to come together. So maybe all of the teachers in the 4 to 6 year olds might come together and share their practices and their challenges, or the 5th or 6th class. And then some teachers, as I say, have gone on and taken a master's level with us. And these are just a selection of some of the things that teachers will say in interviews and, questionnaires, open questions in questionnaires. Like teachers, some of the teachers said it just gave me a new lease of life as a teacher and a professional. I find I'm really enjoying it, but I find it daunting. And sometimes we forget, like when change is happening, it can be, it can be a bit threatening for teachers as well. And they start to feel a little bit daunted by maybe the level of change that they might be having to do. Uh, this one in relation to reading, wow, such a difference. But prior to this, I used to listen to children read. Now I teach it. So sharpening up the teaching, being part of Right to Read encourages me to have high expectations. Covering genres and strategies I would have spent very little time on. And they really seem to, oh, there's the light, professional development and just becoming aware of the research that's out there, and that building capacity that, how to access it in the future when we've withdrawn from the school and they feel that the quality of their lessons have improved. And then, so how are we working? I suppose the way that these are the key emphases that when we start working with a school, that we move away from a kind of a skill and drill workbook based approach and see, can we get a more open, engage that, approach going through workshops. So every day children will have a reading and writing workshop, and then trying to build in the essential skills and strategies into the workshop in ways that motivate and engage the children. And we put quite a high premium on the metacognition piece and giving the children an understanding of what strategies they're learning, why they're learning them, and how they can help improve their reading and writing, and building on children's interests to promote that engagement, to try and get that motivation, that spark going. And because they have a writing workshop and there's a lot of choice in the reading workshop, children's self-efficacy, their agency, their independence tends to improve. So they're kind of the ways we're trying to work, and it usually is quite different to how teachers are actually working within the classrooms. And I like this quote from Reeves and Shin, because they say that, all students have interests, goals, and dreams, and to be intrinsically motivated and to embrace intrinsic growth strivings is simply a part of human motivation and architecture. So when you get that bliss going in classrooms where kids will actually invest and come with you, it's a spark that teachers can be a catalyst for. They can create that spark that will get that striving and help kids move forward. We're embracing a very broad conceptualization of literacy. And yes, in our curriculum, we have oral language, reading, and writing. They're seen as integrated, and the learning outcomes are there for all three aspects. But we know we're living in a globally connected world. And so we're looking to see how the digital, the multimodal, the critical literacy, visual literacy can be built in as well. If we think about the disciplinary focus, there's a shift in that, I suppose, in the literacy field, and looking to see how the literacy skills can be integrated across history, geography, science, the arts. How does an artist read, write, and think? Is it different to how an historian might approach reading or thinking or writing? And going into it a little bit more in a bit more nuanced way. And JC Ippolito, colleague in the States, he talks about age-appropriate disciplinary literacy ways of thinking and working can be taught in age-appropriate ways as early as kindergarten. And my colleague Patrick Burke here in DCU has done work on that level at the senior upper end of primary school. So we're embracing a broad conceptualization of literacy to underpin the work that we're doing with schools. And yes, so all of the skills, the phonological awareness, the phonemic awareness, the phonics, the spelling, the vocab, the fluency, the comprehension, the writing. Like when you start to look at all the skills that are involved in becoming literate, you can see a breakdown in any one of those skills can cause problems for children. And there's a wide research base on each one of those skills. And so there are implications there, I suppose, for teacher knowledge, what kind of sequence to put them in, what are the best pedagogies, how am I going to assess and know the children are moving forward, what kind of resources do I need, how am I going to use my time? So there's a lot to consider there. And I suppose that's at the heart of what we're doing with schools, is making sure that across a week, a fortnight, that those skills are being systematically taught, but in a way that will engage children, and drawing a lot on dialogic approaches. And I suppose another way to think about the skills Scott Paris talks about this notion of constrained skills, and they're the ones, I suppose, on the left-hand side. They're the finite body of knowledge, which once mastered, they're critically important, but once you've mastered them, they're not going to continue to grow across your lifespan. Whereas the vocabulary, the tier 2 and tier 3 words that Isabella Beck talks about, the comprehension, writing processes, craft and vocab, all of those continue to develop across your lifetime. And so just because children can decode words well, and particularly in the deaf context, they might decode the words, but they might not know what the word means. So they mightn't be using it, and they mightn't have met it in reading or in writing. And so they might still get the answer wrong. So the constrained skills, we know it's critically important that children master those by, they say age 8, 9 is a critical juncture, but they're insufficient on their own. So you need the two going in tandem. And I like that chapter. It's a chapter, I think, with Bill Teal. He talks about what does it take in early schooling to have adolescents who are skilled and eager readers and writers. And he talks about a dual approach, the constrained alongside the unconstrained from the get-go. And then there's a huge research base on motivation and engagement and the links with achievement. And it comes from longitudinal, correlational, and quasi-experimental studies, though a lot of them seem to have been done in the middle and upper primary, not as many at the junior end. And Fredericks and et al., they see engagement as a kind of a meta construct, which involves that behavioral, emotional, and cognitive dimensions. So it's what can we see, like the level of effort, concentration, the persistence, the degree of interaction in class, how intrinsically motivated kids are. And Skinner say that engagement is the visible manifestation of motivation. Like, how do we know children are actually motivated? We can see it through those types of activities. And then the social dimension, that literacy is a relational social process, drawing on the work of Ivy and Johnston and Guthrie, which really is linked to dialogic classrooms. So that's kind of the research base, and it's a broad sweep. So what we've been doing is I'll share with you a little bit on the writing work that we've been doing. So we've no national data, unlike you guys in the UK. We can't track back to 2010 and identify trends in writing and attitudes towards writing, but because we've prioritized the reading and numeracy in our national assessments. But I did read with interest your children and young people's writing, and the fact that reading motivation is on the decline, and that's probably typical in a lot of countries. And that was it 28% of children in the UK, the report said didn't meet the standards required at the end of primary school, and that it rose quite significantly for the children in the disadvantaged context. But conversely, the children in the disadvantaged context enjoyed writing more than the kids in the non-disadvantaged. And we find that too on the Right to Read projects. The children they lap up writing. They absolutely love it. In our curriculum, I said already, oral language reading and writing are interconnected, and we have 3 elements in communicating, understanding, exploring, and using. And across oral reading and writing, the first 2 learning outcomes are all about engagement, motivation, and choice. And then the understanding are some of the cognitive skills and the application of those skills in exploring and using. So there's only 9 learning outcomes, but they're they're laid out in more detail across the sweep of the primary school. And in our National Literacy and Numeracy Strategy, there is a commitment to increasing the time for independent reading and writing. So in our work, we're drawing heavily on Steve Graham's work in the US, his Writers in Community model, which kind of conceptualizes writing as a social activity within specific writing communities. And it includes like the children and the writers, the collaborators and the teachers as well, and the readers who serve as an audience for it. And then mentors or teachers, it could be peers as well, helping members to acquire the skills, knowledge, the dispositions, the strategies to successfully achieve the goals of the community. And I think the values of the community are probably important because the affordances of classrooms can either constrain or propel the writing development forward. So I think it rests maybe on teachers' beliefs as well about how writing develops and the best ways to go around it. We used this one, the Berninger and Swanson model as well, because it highlights the planning, the translating, the reviewing, and then the developmental piece that, children might start to generate text at the word level, and then the sentence, then the discourse level in terms of transcription. And then it's easier for them to revise at the word level as well before moving on to sentence or discourse level. And we use that model when we were constructing the rubric that we put together to help teachers assess children's writing. So in the writing, we've opted to go for a writing workshop approach. So this notion of children as writers from the outset, they have their own folders. The emphasis is on their voice, their imagination, their creativity right across the curriculum. So they'll have mini lessons, there'll be conference time, there'll be a share session, and then focused feedback to the children. And actually the folders, it's amazing. The children love those folders. They have evidence of how much they've actually grown over the course of a few months, and they take great pride in those folders, the ownership of them. So we've, as I said, opted for a writing workshop approach with the proviso that we understand that there are many reasons why a writing workshop might not always be as successful as it could be. And some of it is Troya's work. He says teachers often get the structure right, but maybe there's not enough attention to explicit teaching and goal setting, and particularly for the struggling writers. And then maybe not enough attention to the grammar, spelling, punctuation. And then the atmosphere, the tone, the culture of reading, writing in the classroom mightn't be optimum, and it might be more punitive rather than encouraging, and maybe not enough collaboration or agency. And Graham and Sandwell called for hybrid models. And I suppose if you think about the way we're doing it, we're trying to pull in all the research to make our writing workshop work. So this notion of time, teachers are in the schools that we start out with, they're rarely teaching writing on a daily basis, maybe once or twice a week. So this notion of time and predictable time and a predictable routine, it kind of confers that value and priority on reading and writing, and time for the engagement and the creativity. They have to get into a flow for that creativity to come along. And I like this quote from Teresa's work back from 2005, that time to talk, to read, to play, imagine, inhabit, dream, ponder, as well as to draft and reconstruct. Like, it just doesn't happen in a vacuum. And if you do it once a week, you get disconnected. So we've been trying to work with teachers to combine the reading, writing, and the oral language and work across disciplines. And you'll see there that little fella said, and when you're writing it down, you get to take your time and figure out what's the perfect thing to say. So that predictable time means children, when they have choice, they enter what Donald Graves said back in '94, a constant state of composition. So the teacher will choose the genre, but within that, the children will have autonomy over what they will write, and the teacher will teach many lessons to help them build the quality of the writing. And you'll see there, quote, "I love stories because I can make up whatever I want, and no one can say a thing," because they love that freedom to just write what they like. When you tell them they've choice, they cheer and they find their niche. So across a year, they'll write in all genres, and then they'll discover that perhaps they like one more than another. Then that when time and choice come together, the voice is more likely to, I suppose, to come out, and voice is being that imprint of the self or a fingerprint, and highlighting your identity. I think the next one's really important, high expectations and a growth mindset. Sometimes teachers say, oh, they can't write, they don't know this, they can't do that, there's no motivation. But believing that children can read and write is really important. And even at the junior end, here you'll see this teacher said when I was teaching infants, part of it could have been I didn't think they could do that. But once you see they're able, you're actually able to bring them along. And this idea, the sixth grade teacher says, they know, they feel it themselves that they're improving. I use this word, I'm a better reader, speaker, and that it has enriched them. And this little one, a little fella in second grade, wrote to his teacher, "You're one of the coolest teachers in the universe. Thank you for teaching me great stuff all year. I will keep all the valuable knowledge in my head forever." And signed future author. So I think kids will rise to a challenge when you push them, and you create that spark of engagement. They know when they're doing the best they can. So then the explicit teaching piece, I put these 5 steps up because oftentimes we find teachers will do the demonstration and the guided and the independent practice, but a metacognitive piece might be missing, the explanation at the start, the reflection at the end. And then because time is tight, how do you balance your time across the week? So yes, the processes are important. And then the ones in red there in the middle, we put a high priority on those because they're linked to growth in language and expression and the aesthetics and the literary qualities of language. And then small group work for I suppose the grammar, spelling, punctuation, the secretarial aspects of writing, and then the word level and all those craft lessons, delving into high quality mentor texts. So if teachers are thinking, well, how am I going to do this across a week? Maybe they'll do the process ones. You might have to show children how to come up with ideas, maybe 3 or 4 weeks into a unit. Maybe then you do your revision or publishing. So you don't need process ones every day of the week. Small group work, maybe one day, and then the rest of the time concentrate on building that quality of language through good quality mentor texts. Going back to Berninger and Swanson, like the idea that the word, the sentence to the discourse, we always start with the word level ones because you can focus on those and begin to see them transfer into children's writing. And then so you could be teaching those at a junior 4 to 6 year old level, but also up at a 10 to 12. But what might matter would be the complexity of the text and the quality and complexity of the language that you might like children to use. So high quality books that will be matched to the stage of development of the children, and obviously then attending to the structural and organizational pieces. That's just an example of how explicit we would try to go with teachers. That's one on similes. So you might start out with, last week we worked on adjectives to describe this week. There's another way you can describe, well, it could be a simile. And then you might say how it helps the reader to visualize. And then you might just think out loud and give a few examples from the text that you have, and then say why you think they're really good examples of simile. Nick Bishop did a great simile. And then maybe you give them another extract from that book and they read on, seek, and they find another one. But the emphasis would be on, well, why was that a good simile to use? So it's not just that the kids can define a simile or tell you how to create one, but that they know why and the purpose of it. And this little guy says, sometimes authors have really cool lines that mean things, but he doesn't say it. Like the boy was sad, and once the author said the boy felt like a burst balloon. So they get it when it's embedded in the context of real books and real writers who are writing for an audience. And then co-constructing anchor charts with them to capture the high points of the lessons. And we find they look around the room when they're writing and they're like visual reminders to them. And then not to neglect the conventions, the grammar, spelling, punctuation. We suggest to teachers that they read over children's writing and make lists of the skills that they're missing and then form in small groups. And then to take, as I think it was Donald Graves suggested, getting kids to hypothesize about the punctuation, for example. So if we took this little piece from a Julia Donaldson book, before we even read it, we know that there's conversation going on here. How did the author tell us that? And then maybe circling all of the pieces of punctuation and why are they there? So kind of a more speculative approach rather than this is the way to do it. And then obviously every writer needs response and feedback. So we suggest to teachers that when they read over the children's writing on a daily basis or every second day, that they write a little comment on it, but that it be very specific. Really enjoyed your adjective or simile there, or, put a question in. So something very specific, not just ticking it good, good, good. And then that you get that engagement in the share session, that they do that every day, and that children are actively listening and beginning to notice how their peers are wordsmithing, and when they used an interesting word or a sophisticated or more complex word, and that they start to notice and become more word conscious. And then the teacher obviously modeling the kind of language, and then sitting down and giving that feedback in a one-to-one through a conference. And teachers are finding that they're able to use the conferencing to help them figure out the next step or the next mini lesson, and actually just listening to kids and trying to affirm what you see them doing well, and then finding something to do to scaffold or reinforce, and having a system there for that, and using that data to inform your teaching. Yeah, and that builds children's sense of self-efficacy, because as Bandura says, how people think, feel, and motivate themselves and act, that arises from their sense of self-efficacy and their identity, and you can affirm that through your conferencing. So our way into the writing with the little ones, the 4 to 6s, is to start with shared writing, where the teacher is scribing, and it might be connected in across the curriculum. And then maybe it moves into interactive writing where as the children have a bank of letters and sounds and high frequency words, they come up and share the pen with the teacher. And then as quickly as we can, getting them into writing independently. So think, draw, label, write is our mantra in the little ones. And we know from work going back a long time to Montessori, but more recently with Ouellette and Seneschal in Canada, I think, have shown that early writing opportunities really enhance and influence later reading achievement. They were able to track children who had the opportunities to write and then track it on to see how they progressed. So yes, the writing only works if there's a strong word program. So this is an example of writing from one of our 5-year-olds in June. So I'll let you have a quick look at that. It's quite simple. You can see the drawing, the labeling, the sentences. And if we were to examine that, what knowledge does that child have? Well, there are generic nouns in there. A ladybird uses disciplinary vocab, antennae, uses the present tense. There's a label and a diagram. It describes, and there's facts. So that's, it looks very simple, but when you start to look at it, there's a lot of good features of report writing in there. Here's an imaginative piece. Now, this is a junior infant, like we call them junior infants in Ireland. That's their first year in school. It's probably your reception year. So this one was done around January. So after they'd had, like, say, a lot of shared and interactive writing, first entry point into writing independently. And you can see it's kind of at a semi-phonetic level, a reasonably good drawing, but difficult to figure out what the text actually says. And this is the same child a few months later in June. And you can see already there's a massive difference. It's left to right. And you see individuality and voice coming through here. This is a monster with an X. And if you look closely at the picture, there's a big X through the monster. So you never know what children are going to come out with when you give them the opportunity to write whatever they want. And you can see the invented spelling is coming through here. And you again, drawing on Ouellette and Seneschal, they said it's a highly analytic and engaging process, and the kids have fun with it. And you can see how they're generalizing or overgeneralizing the sounds that they have. And this one, again, you know, concepts of print, it conveys a message. There's a sense of voice coming through here and is quite descriptive and even varies the sentence openings, which is great. This one is a senior infant, so this is a 6-year-old. They turned 6 in the second year of school. And you can see this is a step up again. It was a wonderful night in the park. No trouble to be seen. So Bobby and Matt sat on the bench, but they heard a scream. So they said, "It's time to get our suits on," said Matt. So they went into their tiny houses and Matt swooped into the night and Bobby ran into the night. But when they got there, it was a catastrophe. And so you start to see there's a sense of literariness coming through here and dialogue. There's ambitious words, there's connectives. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is that with opportunity to read, write, and think every day, that teachers can make a massive difference to children's early literacy achievement. And then at the senior end, well, actually at the junior end too, linking reading and writing across the curriculum, you drawing on the inquiry-based approach in history, geography, science, teaching them how to come up with their authentic questions, how to research, how to take notes, how to draft, and then what kind of mini lessons will bring it along. Not to turn report writing or explanation writing into a formula, but to do it in a way that honors the imagination and creativity of the children. And then lots of modal pieces. So they combine them
Anthony,
into
sorry
yes.
to interrupt. I'm giving you your 10 minutes. So it's 22. So if we go
Okay.
on for 10 more minutes, then we'll have 10 minutes for
Okay.
questions. Thank you.
All righty. Thank you for the interruption. I'm waxing lyrical here. So children, because they're combining the reading and the writing, we want them to write every day as well. So they might do a quick write. So they might have their questions, they might be reading, taking their notes, and then they do a quick write at the end, and then they can come together to put it into a report. So these are the kinds of mini lessons that teachers might teach over 3 to 4 weeks, and you'll see the different kind of ones there. And then the nonfiction piece. I think the mentor texts that you choose are really important to support this work. And this guy, Aronson from the US, he's an historian, and he says, you know, too much nonfiction has basically serviceable prose. In the minds of the authors, get that information out there, get the content. But he says he really likes an author who pauses to look really at why is it this word and that word? Why is it the cadence of that sentence against this sentence? The care of how the author crafts a sentence. I think of my books really more as symphonies, as compositions, and I try to feel the unfolding of the melody. So we found that children were, they were learning about the craft of writing and coming up with the words, adjectives, verbs, similes, metaphors, all that wonderful stuff in their fiction writing, but they weren't necessarily transferring it into their non-fiction writing. And so one of our teachers took it on as a research project for their master's work. And could we get children to integrate the creative and the aesthetic dimensions with the content piece and the disciplinary piece? And that's an example from a fifth, sixth class work. So you can see deep within the ocean where an underwater world lies, a variety of marine mammals are hunting for their prey, swirling shoals of fish, and you see it's quite descriptive and elaborated. The turtle, a small lonely turtle lost in the tangles of the seaweed. It's actually beautifully, beautifully written. And it came out of the research and the opportunity to apply. So there's similes in there, alliteration, there's strong verbs. There's a lot of creating and setting the scene, double adjectives, and so on. So there's a real sense of voice. And then this teacher also suggested to the kids how to create a found poem. And that's when you take elements or literary pieces. You're probably quite familiar with that. And then having children apply that to their own writing and present their literary work in a different form, in this case, poetic. Or it might be thinking about another way for report writing that you could present your work. So maybe it's a narrated PowerPoint, and then you're really looking at digital and visual skills and a kind of an ensemble multimodal package. And then how do you know children are actually progressing? So in our work, teachers had said, well, how can we know that we're really pushing up the level in the writing? So we worked together with our coaches, the teachers. We looked into the research base, the developmental models, and we came up with a rubric which crosses over 14 levels. So it has the 5 components that you see there, the conventions, the organization, the ideas, the voice, and the craft of writing. And we went for this level of detail, like an analytic rubric. And it goes, I like this quote from Breland because he says, if the interest is in specific strengths and weaknesses of a student's writing for use as instructional feedback, a holistically scored essay is at best a blunt instrument. So if you're trying to fine tune your teaching and really tailor it to the needs of the children, you need something quite fine tuned. So you'll see that the conventions is only 1/5 of the whole rubric. And so we put a high priority on the word choice and the voice because that's really going to develop the children's language, and it'll help with their reading comprehension. So opportunities to play with the language, the lexical, the syntactical, the rhetorical variety. And as Deborah Miles, she says, varying your sentence lengths to create that textual rhythm and altering the syntactic structure of sentences. So trying to bring all of that research into a rubric that would help teachers think about how they're teaching writing and what to teach next. So using it for professional development, it gave me a good aim, and I understood what was required to kind of step them up and, reach the next level. And then when teachers start talking to others in the class above and below, we can start mapping progression across the school, and everybody really looking critically at how we can push them up to the next level. And that's really what it looks like. That's just the first. This is the word choice one. So it's at the word level, the sentence level, and the imagery and creative language use. So there's actually quite a lot of depth in there, and we have it in across all the genres as well. And then over the course of the year, they'll work through. So they might do narrative in September, and they might cycle back to it again a little bit later in the year. So building and revisiting genres across the year, I think, is really important. And then I think we're not really going to have much time, but I have 5 minutes maybe. So in the Irish, so that's the writing piece, but we want children to be reading every day also. And we know from our assessments, evaluations of strategy in Ireland, that disengagement, motivation and engagement for children at the senior end of primary is problematic. So when children were asked in questionnaires as part of the disadvantage strategy evaluation, there were 28.7% of children who strongly agreed that they liked reading a lot. And very interestingly, they reached the national norms in reading. And then you had 18.8% and another 8.5% who really disliked it or disliked it a lot. And their achievement, you can see, is way below, significantly below. And they tended to be the children in the most disadvantaged, the urban band one DEIS schools. And that idea that children are disengaged from classrooms, you know, and I could put to when they have experience of academic tasks in classrooms that are kind of disconnected from their needs and their motivations. So that was a reason why we, in my work over the last few years, can we leverage in motivation and engagement to sit alongside the instructional piece in the classroom? And that's really what we've been after. So looking at the research base on the importance of reading volume, the leisure reading, the print exposure, access to real books. A lot of the schools just didn't have books that were engaging or interesting enough for children to read. So we would do an audit of books with the school and secure funding for them to create the libraries and classroom libraries and sets of books that will bring that dialogic piece into focus and create a dialogic environment, whether it's in the fiction or the non-fiction, and to try and get all of this going for all kids. Like this guy in 6th grade, he's like, when asked his favorite book, that's like asking my ma who her favorite child is. I can't answer that. There's too many books I like. And that's the transformation that we're kind of after on this project. And then the dialogic piece. We know from the meta-analyses that when classrooms are dialogic, that they're associated with higher achievement, and it's the most important for the average and low achievers, and the longer the better. So we've prioritised mixed ability grouping at times, and the children will self-select into what books they want to read, and they have these little reading groups. But we also ensure that the learning support or set team will work with the children to unpick any other roadblocks that they have. So they're getting learning support in addition to their reading group in class. And this idea of books worth reading and discussing, and what's her name? Gay Ivy, she talks about, without serious support of students' sense of autonomy and relevance in their reading, deep engagement is not likely. And that's most important for the children in marginalised classrooms. We draw on Lauren Resnick, the academically accountable talk, accountability to the learning community, to knowledge and standards of reasoning, and this idea that children will grow into the intellectual life that surrounds them, drawing on Peter Johnston's work in the US as well. And then also drawing on this idea that Louise Rosenblatt, that reading is on a continuum and it doesn't reside in the text alone. And it's through discussion that children will come to a richer interpretation and develop empathy and a sense of community. And I do like this quote from her. She says, there's the terms such as the reader are somewhat misleading, though convenient fictions. There's no such thing as a generic reader or a generic literary work. There are in reality only the potential millions of individual readers of individual literary works. And the reading of any work of literature is of necessity an individual and unique occurrence involving the mind and the emotions. And then when they come together, we can share those and build together. And Gay Ivy says that conversations about the inner life of book characters improves children's self-regulation, their social relationships, and their moral development. We have found giving them open choice in response to text, how would you like to respond on a daily basis, creates that kind of emotional intelligence and empathy. And that's a quote from a boy in 6th class who was like, I never cried at a book before. And we don't have time to look at that letter now, but he wrote a very powerful letter. Because if you know Private Peaceful, the guy is court-martialed and he's put to death in the end. And the children think it's a work of fiction. They think, oh, somebody's going to come in and save him. And they're absolutely shocked and appalled. And this idea, that literature will allow us to test ourselves against the lives we might one day lead comes from an Irish author. He wrote the most amazing letter. I love you with all my heart. He's writing to his wife and he writes this amazing letter. So this notion that empathy and emotional intelligence it's not just about the skilled work. It's also about the other opportunities. And so this idea of the children as, readers, writers, thinkers, the classroom as an interpretive space, scaffolding the language that they need. They might start out with simple little ones like you see there on the right, and then building to more complex, more sophisticated, higher level oral language. So you're meeting your oral language reading and writing commitments. Normalizing talk about books is what this teacher has said. So I'm looking at the time here and I know it's 10 to. So what else do I have? But actually, when we started this work, we did a lot of this work with teachers, and then we said, what's actually happening in these discussions? Because on the surface, a bit like what Troya said at the beginning, they had the basic structures. And yet, even though they were doing vocab or comprehension strategies, the children's achievement wasn't always rising. So it was like, well, all right, what's the piece that's missing? So some teachers went in and we did a teacher researcher inquiry, and teachers taped their conversations, their book discussions with children, week 1, week 4, week 8, and then some kept it up across a year. And we analysed them according to the kinds of codes that you see here, which we took from existing research like Nystrand and Mercer and Pearson and people like that. And what we found was there wasn't a spark. There wasn't enough of an emphasis on the higher order dimensions. The children were quiet, they weren't elaborating their responses, and so the teachers really needed to work hard. There's a quote there from Nystrom saying, getting a discussion going is a little like building a fire with enough kindling of the right sort, accompanied by patience and along with student engagement. Ignition is possible, but though not on a teacher's first or second try. So it does take time to get that conversation, academically rich conversation going. But when we really went after it, you'll see by week 8, the balance of teacher-child talk had evened out. And by the end of the year, it was 20% child talk, 20% teacher talk and 80% children guiding, doing it. And at the start, it was the opposite way around. Even the best teachers were talking too much and then answering questions that maybe weren't higher enough, or, that they didn't know the answer to. So asking enough of the open-ended, rich kinds of questions. Yeah, so that's basically what we've done. This idea of the agentic engagement and trying to bring as many of these evidence-based practices together in the one classroom and school, and to build together over the course of a year. And so we're also making sure that, we're looking at the wow words, or we call them wow words. They're the high level sophisticated language in reading, and children have opportunities to choose those words and how they'll work through them. Looking at the fluency piece too, really important in the senior end. They're reading more complex, elaborated sentences, so they need some opportunities to refine fluency and explicit teaching when they need it. So there's some of the things the children said, not the parents, the teachers. Like this one, if when you're in a group, it's a lot easier to see hidden meanings. Like somebody might have a theory about why somebody's acting in such and such a way, and you can find out conspiracy things. That's one of my favorite parts of reading time, is being able to talk about the book. And this one, I have a weird relationship with reading response. I don't want to sort of delve into the book. I don't want to ruin it. But when I start doing it, it's like the words pour out of me. And this mixed ability piece, the higher achievers with the children maybe who weren't as fluent, working together on a book, and that they had chosen to read together, was very powerful. And then I suppose they're my key takeaways from what I've learned so far. A dual focus on cognitive and affective dimensions, that growth mindset, that push, the challenge, having the high expectations. And then I think the relatedness and the sense of belonging that you create in a classroom, we're working together. And then sustained support for the schools. It has to be customized. And then being aware of the affective dimensions for teachers and the tensions that are there with a whole school approach. And then you can't have a great literacy project without great quality books and resources. And then if schools don't have the resources to buy them, how do we make that a reality? And then the collaboration for me is really important, and we're working as co-researchers. And then I said, no silver bullet. And a quote, the last quote goes to this teacher. It affirmed for me that if the right structures are put in place and resources and thinking, something amazing can happen. So,
Oh,
sorry, I went on
wonderful.
too long.
No, that was fantastic. Thank you so much, Ethna. Just a very quiet round of applause from me. I'm sure there's lots of other people who
Thank
are
you.
quietly applauding at home or at work. And there's some lovely comments and a couple of questions in the chat that we've just got time for. So
Okay.
I think you've obviously got people thinking, and one of the questions that you've alluded to is really the kind of professional development element of this co-creation and co-research that you're really engaging teachers in. And Laura's asking, how can we develop our teachers leading literacy, particularly our middle leaders, through tailored CPD for leadership for literacy to guide them in leading whole school literacy? So really, what is there anything that we might be able to take away from that, or that you've learned through your work that can help us with developing leadership of literacy, taking into account kind of current leadership structures?
Yeah, well, we've been very lucky this past year. We have funding from the Department of Education to have a full-time teacher coach working with us. And what we're working towards is, so in a school where you've got 4 to 12-year-olds. In Ireland, they're divided into 4 stages: the juniors, the 4 to 6-year-olds, then the 6 to 8, the 10. So getting a teacher leader, like somebody within the school who maybe has a particular interest in the literacy side of things, or maybe has a qualification, or somebody who's just interested in really honing their practice, and that they can work maybe a little more closely with our literacy coach, who's there to work with everybody, but can work more intensively with those teacher leaders. And until the next time the coach comes back, they can help to sustain, they can gather information on the ground and to feed back to the coach for ways that we might need to work in the next few weeks or months. So it's trying to get a leadership team going, and then as they're working, that they start to document the approaches, start to see, well, what's in our current school literacy plan? How might we need to change it up or make it more specific? So I think the leadership teams are really important for going forward, for the sustainability and building the capacity of schools to keep things going. And then I think if they could work together in clusters with teachers in another school, and that they can learn from each other. But yeah, having somebody linked, like our coach, linked to the school and building those relationships who really understands what's happening on the ground, I think that's a critical part of it.
And that it's not one person, it's not all on one person's shoulders, it's that
Exactly.
collaboration is really coming through strongly. Thank you so much. I think we've got time for maybe one more. The questions are mounting up now. There have been a couple of people who are particularly interested in your assessment rubric, actually. And
Yes.
so obviously there's some people would like to know how they get to your assessment rubric. But before you answer that one, somebody was asking about that kind of teacher subjectivity. How do we support teachers to deal with quite complex rubrics like that and get an understanding of what they're looking for? And they're asking about things like moderation. Were there lots of activities around that, Efna?
Well, yes, when we were developing the rubric in the first place, we did a lot of inter-rater reliability. We did a lot of moderating with teachers and obviously with our coaches. And in the work that we're going to do now, we see that we want to trial the rubric more widely with teachers across the whole school and getting them working in depth. I think probably the way to do it is that they take 1 or 2 of those dimensions or components. Like the word choice is a natural one because it's going to benefit the reading as well as the writing. And if they figure out how to assess the children's writing using even 1 or 2 of those components, they'll get a steer on how to go forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is complex, and the teachers think it's very detailed, and how am I going to get my head around this? So you try and pick 1 or 2 elements to work on at a time. It's the same when we work whole school, that we don't try to change everything at once. The school
Yes.
chooses, let's work with writing this year, maybe next year we'll work on reading. So we'll sustain support with a school for 2 to 3 years, because to get something really good going, it takes that long. Yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah, I
Thank
think work
you.
in small groups and work. So we're asking teachers to bring to the sessions with the coach, to bring 3 samples of writing with them to work with the coach. So maybe who you think is a lower achiever, a middle achiever, a higher achiever. Let's take the rubric and see, can we use it to analyze the writing. Yeah,
Fantastic.
that
Thank
helps
you.
too.
I think some people have been asking about where they can find out more about these brilliant approaches that you've been sharing today, and I wonder if we can follow up
Yeah,
perhaps with some information. Lovely. There's some brilliant
yeah.
references there.
There's some references there. The articles are the ones I've put there are ones that are open access that people should be able to get
Oh, thank you.
their hands on. And then in terms of the actual rubric itself, we're revamping. One of the things teachers were saying with the professional development was, could we have everything in one spot? So we did have a fairly basic website. It's been revamped at the minute, and we will put the rubric up and make it available on the website. So people will have access to it, and we will develop some materials around that. Now, in the book, there are chapters in the book that show you how to use the rubric, and there's samples of children analysed, using the rubric to give you a steer on it. And then there's the last chapter, chapter 12, shows how it puts a framework in place for how a school might get started on changing their approach to writing. And I'm
Fantastic.
happy to answer emails, or if people want to get in touch personally after that, that's fine too.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, we're going to need to draw to a close now, and I will come back to some of the questions in the chat and answer people. So if you're waiting for a response, I'll do my best before we finish. But I know that Teresa's got a couple of slides, but just to say an enormous thank you again. There's clearly a great appetite to learn more from you there, Ethne, in the chat. And I think yeah, there's definitely a lot we can learn from these more collaborative and connected approaches. A lot there that resonated with me about the relationships behind it, as well as all the connections between the different aspects of literacy. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Teresa, did you want to add a couple of closing remarks? You're on mute.
Yes, I think they're on the next two slides. Am I right? The last two,
Yes.
just to say, for those of you who are still with us, lovely. The next Literacy and Social Justice seminar will be on the 19th of March, 2 to 3, and the three of us, Agnieszka Kuzmikova, Sarah McGowan, and myself, will be sharing our paper on the decline in volitional reading, evidence-informed ways forward. And given we're in the National Year of Reading, that may be something useful to join us in. And lastly, we have a Key Stage 3. I think there's one more visual. No?
Oh, sorry.
Yes, thank you. Scott, I was thinking maybe I didn't put it in. I'm not sure I had. We've got a Key Stage 3 conference coming up on the 6th of March in World Book Week, which will be really fabulous. Practical ideas about overcoming reading roadblocks and reconnecting your teens with the texts that matter, the texts that they're interested in, that they'd really like to enjoy. So Kelly's just put that link in the chat line. If you want to follow that up, please do. And do join the Reading for Pleasure newsletter if you haven't already, because that's the way you'll hear much more about the opportunities just like this one to come and join us. Thank you, everybody, for joining Etna today. And a big thank you again to Etna. You've raced through years of work here, actually, years of work. How many years have you been doing the Right to Read? 8?
No, actually, we started around 2012, 2013.
Okay.
Yeah, with the original ones, and then left them for a while and then came back at it again a little bit later. So yeah,
So over 12 years of work being shared in that complex way, mixing the integration of will and skill and developing readers, writers and thinkers who write and read and think every day. And that sounds very rich to me. Lovely. Thank you,
Thank you
everybody.
so much. Bye.
Take care.